Hey guys, what's up? Disney Nuts here with another episode of How I Shot This. Now the cool thing of this photo is that it's a 100-second exposure. Now if you've been to the Pandora area or if you've even seen my previous video, it is so dark that we sometimes even have to bump the ISO up so we can be able to get it underneath the 30-second maximum timer limit which these cameras have. But let's say we want to shoot at ISO 100. We want to shoot at ISO 100 because we know it's the best quality that our camera is going to give us. And we want to shoot it at a certain f-stop. In this case, I wanted to shoot this photo at f8 and I wanted to shoot at ISO 100. But when I was running the timer, I realized that I was bumping up to the 30 seconds and the exposure meter on the middle was not hitting the middle. So I know it's going to come up underexposed. So what do? Well, that's where we use these third-party apps, which I'm going to include a link underneath. There's one for the Apple and there's one for the Android. And what this does is that we could put in some basic settings and the app will automatically compute how long the exposure needs to be with the settings that I tell it that I want it to be. For example, I'm going to take a regular shot. I'm not going to do anything fancy. I'm going to put the camera on the widest f-stop so the timer is really fast. Let's say I'm going to leave it as automatic, take the shot, and it's probably going to come back with some really high grainy shot, which looks terrible. And we're going to see that it's probably a second, and it's going to say, okay, 1 second at f4 and at ISO 6400. But the exposure is just perfect. So I'm going to take those numbers, I'm going to put it into this app, and you'll see that it's going to give me the correct exposure that I need to leave my shutter open. Now, in order to shoot this type of shot, we need to go into bulb mode. And basically, there's two ways of doing this. In the case of my camera, the Canon 80D, there's a switch there for bulb mode, which is B. On some of the other Canons, like the T5 and the T6, you basically keep on rolling your shutter all the way to after 30, and you'll see that the 30 will change to the word bulb. So it's basically the same thing. Okay, now how do we leave the shutter open? Just like we do with the fireworks. We got three ways of doing it on the Canon cameras. One, using a touchscreen like what I have now. I will go ahead and tap it once. I'll let the timer run for the whole 100 seconds and tap it again to stop it. That's the first way. The second way is using the shutter release, which you guys have used for fireworks, which is where we press it and we leave it pressed for the duration of the time. Okay, and some of the remotes even have a little lock that you can slide it forward, which makes it even better. Okay, the third way is probably the hardest way, and I don't recommend it. It's actually pressing the shutter button and leaving it pressed for the whole 100 seconds. Now, if you got a steady hand, good luck. I don't have it, and most likely you'll shake the camera. So if you can actually buy the shutter release, it's probably the best way to go. Okay, so let's head over to Animal Kingdom now, and I'll show you what we're going to be doing. Woohoo! Yeah, Animal Kingdom! Okay, so we're here at the Tree of Life, little tree right behind me. Hope you didn't notice it. And it's actually an oil rig flipped upside down. I don't know if you guys knew that little tip. Okay, so now it's a waiting game until nighttime so we can take our shots. Time for a little break. It's pretty dark, so I'm just going to talk here for you guys. Okay, so you can see I got my camera set up here, and if I press the shutter, I basically says that my exposure indicator is like almost dead in the center, which is what I want. But then if you see my f-stop is actually 4.5, but I want to shoot it at f8. So if I do f8, let's see what happens. You'll see as my exposure indicator, it goes to the left, which is telling me that the camera cannot determine the time of the exposure because it's obviously over 30 seconds. And as you know, this camera does not go over the 30 seconds. If I hit it all the way, it'll just stay there on 30. It won't go over. So we got to go eventually into bulb mode. And bulb mode is where you can actually press it and it'll stay open as long as you press the button. But then the problem is, how do we know how long do we leave it open? So that's where the app comes in, okay? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to lower the aperture, bring it to f4, and we can actually leave the ISO at 100, or let's put it over 400. That way you don't have to waste so much time. Let's put it even 1600, okay? and we press the shutter to determine the exposure if it's okay. And it says it's going to take 1/6 of a second at f4 ISO 1600, okay? Even though we know this is not what we want to do, what I just want to more or less find out is the settings. For example, 2 seconds at f4 at ISO 1600. So I'm going to put those into my the app right now. I'm going to go ahead and put them in. Okay, so we got our settings now, and the app tells us it's 1 minute and 20 seconds. So first thing we're going to do is bring the camera out of manual mode, and we're going to put it into bulb mode, which allows us to control how long the exposure is going to be. Okay, so we're going to change our settings to f8, as I already did, and we're going to put the ISO to 100. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and start it. And I'm going to wait 1 minute and 20 seconds. And there we go. Let's tap it again. And there's our perfectly exposed photo of Pandora with 120 seconds, 1 minute and 20 seconds, I'm sorry. And look how great it looks. With ISO 100, everything looks nice and neat. So let's put this into the computer and edit so you guys can see how it looks.
Okay, so let's get into the editing. There's a couple of fun things that we do on this one, stuff that we haven't done before, so hope you'll pick up some tips on this one, and hopefully it's good for your editing as well. Okay, so for starters, here's the photo that we imported. As you can see, the seconds, it's 82 seconds, which is 1 minute and 20 or so. 1 minute and 22 seconds actually, which is when we use our app to compute the exact time. And here's f8, which I consider the sweet spot on those lenses, and ISO 100. So let's go ahead and start. Okay, so the first thing that I liked of this photo, to be honest with you, is that there's a lot of colors. Now if you've been to Pandora, you've seen that most of the area is so blue. So I picked this area specifically because first of all, there's green down here, we got red in the middle, we got some nice flowing water, and then we got some trees, and we got the skyline, which everything looks great. So my first tip for you guys would be, if you guys are shooting Pandora, always try to pick something that has a lot of different colors in it. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. First thing is first, temperature, we could play with this and make it a little cooler, which looks cool. I'm going to actually bring it a little bit of left here. Tint, I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm not going to touch that. Exposure, let's bring it up a little bit. Again, when I touch this exposure under this part here, I usually look at the whole image. Then later we can go back with the adjustment brush here and we can fix little areas. But just for starters, this whole panel is going to affect the whole screen. So we're just going to go through this quickly, and then we'll add in some little details in here, which I can see that we can do. Highlights, I like to bring this down just a tad, sometimes all the way. And let's bring the shadows up. Maybe too much. It gets a little grainy, then let's bring it down, because I don't want to overdo it either. Okay, so just a tad. The white I usually adjust after the black, and I'll tell you why. Because I like to do the black first to get the image nice and neat, and then the white I go back and I adjust it to give it the pop. There you go. Next we got here is the presence, which you got the clarity, vibrance, and saturation. Clarity we can touch just a bit, which I've been using on some of my photos, and even though you may not notice it, it is there. Somewhat like a little sharpening. It gives it a little sharpen to the photo. Vibrance, yeah, why not? Let's bring it a little touch, because again, since we're using a raw image, it doesn't really have any colors or processing whatsoever, which is good. But at the same time, just like every other raw photo, you got to go back and touch them, which is what I'm doing here. Okay, let's scroll down here. We're not going to touch anything here regarding the colors. We can. One cool thing that I usually do, if it's blue, I could probably bring some of this stuff this way, but it makes it a little look weird. But we're not going to leave that. We're going to leave all these as 0. Okay. Sharpening, sure. Let's bring up the sharpening. Always good to bring up the sharpening a little bit, just a tad. and I like to bring up the masking, which makes it basically, it'll sharpen certain areas, not the whole image, which is, I like that. Noise reduction, a tad, sure. My formula is usually half of one and of the other. The lens correction, of course, and this, as you've probably seen many times, will fix the edges. See that if I turn it off? See how it fixes the edges here? Good thing of these raw files, it brings in the lens profile, as we saw. Here it's bringing in the information for the Tokina lens, which is the lens that I'm using right now, which is the f4, 12 to 28. Now the image here by itself, it looks great, but I am going to do a couple things with the adjustment brush. And the first thing I'm going to do is I want to bring these nice and green ferns, I want to bring them out. So I'm actually going to do new, and I'm going to select color, and I'm going to select the green. Okay, let's select green. And then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure my brush is pretty much this size. All right, let's make it this size here. And the flow, we can do 50%, doesn't need to be half. Now since I'm going to be painting over the whole flower bed, at least whatever these plants are, I'm going to turn off my auto mask on, because that way I'm really not interested in getting the little details, because I'm going to be painting the whole thing. Okay, let's bring this up a little bigger, and I'm going to turn that off, and I'm just going to paint over this with a brush like this, brush like that. You can see how the green is coming out, which is pretty cool. I like to make sometimes, which is a tip I give people, I like to make certain colors outstand, pop out more than the others, but I won't do them all, okay? So that's the trick here. Make certain colors pop out, maybe sometimes it's the blue, or something I'll pick up the red, but just one of the colors, not all of them, okay? And just in case, as you guys know, you can come over here and hit the show selected mask overlay, and this shows exactly what I painted over, which is good to get sometimes those little details. It's also good to erase also, so I can actually click here, erase, and I can come in and I say I don't want to paint over the water or the rocks and stuff like that, so I just come over here and erase it a little bit. And just like the paintbrush when I'm painting, I can select the size and stuff like that, and you can also hit the brackets, the left and right brackets, to make it bigger if you got a Mac. Again, Windows, I'm sorry, which is what I'm using here. Okay, so I erase that, so it's just the ferns. If I skipped one or two, well, it's not okay. It's okay. And okay, there we got the bottom part is done. Now the second thing I like here to do is the sky. I want to make it a little darker, or just do something different with it. So I'm going to hit the adjustment brush one more time. Since I got it already selected, I'm going to hit new. And this time I'm just going to leave this as white. I'm not going to touch anything with the color, but I'm just going to bring down the exposure a little bit. And here I am going to turn on the auto mask, because I'm going to be painting the sky, but I don't want it to eventually paint over everything. So let's do that. Okay, just a little bit, just like that. Okay, we paint a little bit over here, a little bit over there, and let's see how it looks if I do my mask overlay. You'll see how Lightroom somewhat tried to not ruin the back of the images, but it did. Again, it's not perfect, but it does its best. Now, one thing that I do that we are going to use this time that we haven't used before is actually the fringe, because if you look at the image here, I'm going to zoom in. Around these parts here, it's got like a weird glow to it. If you can see it, I'm going to zoom into it one more time. And it's got like a weird glow to it, and that's where we're going to bring up this thing here, which is the defringe. And what that does, it's going to go and try to take off the really sharp edges around these items, and it won't look as bad. It won't look as fake. Here we go. So there you go. So now it doesn't look that bad. Another thing that you can do is you can actually erase it, but you're going to erase it just a tad. Like I'm going to bring it like really little, like a 12, and let's zoom in. I can move this around. And I'll just erase it really light. Somewhat you can't even notice. It doesn't even look like I'm doing anything, but I am. And I just paint over certain objects, and that takes away those really weird looking fake edges to it. So there we go. Again, I am erasing what I previously did, And what I did is I put my flow really low, because that way what I am erasing is just basically lowering the number. It's still there, but it doesn't look as fake. Okay, so if I zoom out, you see now it doesn't look as bad. It doesn't look as playish, as I like to say. Let's bring down the black here a little bit. There the sky looks a little bit darker. Let's select the brush one more time and fix these areas on the bottom because it looks like I missed them. There we go. Down here. Then the tree, that's fine. So it's normal that the dark part is on the top, which is what I always like to try to do. And it's brighter on the bottom. That's perfectly fine. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here is actually the waterfall. It's all blue, which this is what I was speaking about earlier, that it's just sometimes so oversaturated. And what we're going to do, we're going to zoom into the water parts and we're going to actually desaturate it so we get a white or somewhat not as blue waterfall. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so you can see how blue it is. Okay. And just as we apply colors with the brushes, we can actually go backwards, which means that as well as I'm putting in color and stuff like that, I can move these to the left and take colors out. I can take white out. I can take exposure down. So I'm going to hit new, meaning that I'm going to click a new one. And I'm going to do saturation. And you can see I'm putting minus 57 because I want to desaturate an area. Okay, again, put this as 50. And I'm going to paint over the waterfall. And you're going to see how it brings it out a little bit. Okay. That way it makes it look more natural. It doesn't look like a big blob of blue. And there we go, there we go. And again, I can click here and see what I'm doing. And you'll see this is where I painted. And again, even though I'm desaturating, still for Lightroom it means it thinks that I'm painting. So I'm going to take that down a little more. I can make my brush a little smaller. Let's get this little stream here as well. Little sucker there, he was hiding. Let's do this one here. Let's do these rocks here. Let's paint them. It's funny because I actually will use many times the overlay, the masking overlay, this, and just paint where the red is. And it's so cool because then you just hit the button and you can see all the changes you did. It's like, bam, there it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn it off. And there we go. So now we got the water that pops. It pops out. Even though it's desaturated, it actually pops out. And you can actually, if you want, you can even bring up the exposure a little bit. Again, this is all personal preferences. Okay, and there is our photo of Pandora that we took at 1 minute and 20 seconds at f8 ISO 100, and this is how I do those awesome extra long exposures. So there's our photo, guys, and hope you liked the video. And again, feel free to like it and subscribe, and please share this with your friends. Pass the word around. That way we can keep these videos flowing. And until next time, stay awesome, guys.